Hello there guys, RMP792 here. Right, so, where was I? Yes, yesterday I was talking about the Imperium and the history of... This is continuing my 40k, just general chat. You know, so if... yeah, it should be clearly labelled when I upload it, but we'll see. So yesterday I was talking about the Imperium, and I said that today I would talk about the Forces of Chaos. The Forces of Chaos are arguably the single biggest threat in the 40k universe. However, let's face it, that's endlessly debatable. Every single one of the races in 40k has something going for them in the they could totally bugger over the entire human race stakes. Well, with the exception of a couple of the minor ones. I was trying to think of an example of, you know, somebody who is considered a major race but isn't really that much of a threat. The only one I would arguably say is the Dark Eldar, but that's a discussion for another time. And if you're a Dark Eldar fan, I don't mean they're not dangerous, I just mean they have no specific intention to destroy the entire Imperium. It's just not what they're interested in. But yes, anyway, the Forces of Chaos. So, last time I talked about the Horus Heresy, and following the defeat of the Heresy, they retreated into the Eye of Terror. Now, in order to explain the Eye of Terror, I'm going to have to go way, way back in the timeline. So, the Chaos Gods are entities within the warp. They are formed from the psychic emanations of living beings, and they have a consciousness and will of their own. Now, I named the four gods last time, but they are, once again, and I'll go through them one at a time and give you some detail this time. The oldest of the Chaos Gods is Nurgle. Nurgle is the god of death, to all intents and purposes, of pestilence, of disease. He's also the god of life, because, let's face it, everything is a cycle, everything is reborn. He's very much the god of how things do not change, to all intents and purposes. He is the most stable of all the Chaos Gods. And he is often considered almost a fatherly figure. He's referred to as Old Father Nurgle by a lot of his followers. And Nurgle is very, very powerful, very, very old, and very much... You know, his followers are... For example, his best-known followers are the Plague Marines, which are pretty much exactly what they sound like. They are, you know, they use bioweapons, they use all kinds of hideous stuff. Because at the end of the day, Nurgle loves all life, especially teeny tiny microbes that do horribly unpleasant things to sentient beings. You know, so he's usually depicted as this kind of enormous, disease-ridden, bloated figure that's really happy about that fact. So Nurgle's an odd one. The opposite of Nurgle, if you consider Nurgle a force of stability, the opposite of Nurgle is Tzeentch. Tzeentch is the god of change, and he's also the patron of sorcerers, those who use the powers of the warp in ways that could be considered magical. And Tzeentch is... Actually, yeah, I'm sure Tzeentch is the opposite of Nurgle. I can't remember. Yes, Tzeentch is. Sorry, I'm getting confused because I'm thinking about Khorne, but I'll talk about him in a minute. But yes, Tzeentch is the Lord of Change. There's a general attitude that nobody knows what Tzeentch looks like, because at the end of the day, it doesn't stay the same from one second to the next. He is the Lord of Change, and he embodies that fact. Everything shifts, everything changes, and he's never the same from one moment to the next. So actually trying to pin down what he looks like is basically impossible. Tzeentch is very much the one who rewards sneakiness. He likes his followers to use their intelligence and use power. You know, so somebody who's attempted to gain power through political machinations, they're the kind who would be a follower of Tzeentch, as well as sorcerers and that kind of stuff. So Tzeentch is again very powerful. Well, they're all very powerful. I don't need to keep saying that. But you know, Tzeentch is a very interesting and slightly creepy one. He's also by far the most cunning, and it's widely accepted that he is he will have some sort of great master plan that's so in-depth and so cunning that no one could ever understand it. And there's even an argument that he'll never actually achieve his great master plan because it's so cunning that it's never actually going to be viable to come to pass. So Tzeentch is a very interesting one. The next of the Chaos Gods is Khorne. Khorne is the least subtle of all the Chaos Gods. He's the one who's always depicted sitting on a throne made out of other people's skulls. If you put up a 40k video and it gets anything above like 1,000 views, you can guarantee somewhere in the comments someone will write out "blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne," because it's just one of those go-to phrases. And followers of Khorne are the least subtle. They're the guys who like to get up close. They like to kill with their hands, with swords, with axes, with melee weapons. They like to feel their enemies die beneath them. So you also get Khornite berserkers, who are pretty much exactly what they sound like. They are insane, and they will just close to kill as fast as possible, with little or no thought for their own safety, because Khorne doesn't really give a crap where the blood comes from as long as the blood flows. He doesn't care if it's his own followers dying or if it's their enemies dying. But anyone who kills in his name will get rewarded by him. And the thing is, technically you don't even have to kill in his name. If you're a particularly effective murderer, he might help you along just because you're a pretty effective murderer, and that's kind of cool to him. But at the same time, he kind of hates Tzeentch's followers. So there's lots of scuffles and fights between Chaos Sorcerers and Khornite followers, because to Khorne's sorcery it's just anathema. He hates it. So you don't tend to find many sorcerers among Khorne's loyalists. There's an interesting comment about Khorne, which is Khorne was there the first time a caveman picked up a rock and beat his friend to death for a piece of food. And that really does sum up Khorne. He is as old as time itself. He's almost as old as Nurgle, and yeah, every dark human impulse, that urge to kill, that urge to hurt, that feeds Khorne. So all the war in the galaxy, that's just helping him along. And then the last and the youngest of the Chaos Gods is Slaanesh. Now, Slaanesh is a very interesting case, because Slaanesh didn't exist prior to the Dark Age of technology. Because I mentioned there was a massive warp storm that basically cut off the Imperium, or what was... Yeah, I can't even remember if they name what the human forces were referred to themselves at that time as. But anyway. But the massive warp storm that cut them off, that was caused by the birth of Slaanesh. And I'll go more into the details of the birth of Slaanesh when I talk about the Eldar, because that's very important to them. But the birth of Slaanesh is actually what created the Eye of Terror. It caused a massive breach in the warp. But Slaanesh is a very interesting one, because Slaanesh is the god of lust and passion. I'll use he for ease, but Slaanesh does not care. Slaanesh is depicted equally as a prince, the prince of pleasure, the princess of pain, and Slaanesh does not really have gender, so to speak. He, she shifts around to whatever the hell it feels like. Usually whatever's going to be most attractive to the follower in question that they're trying to seduce. And the interesting thing, lust and passion doesn't just mean sex, for the record. That's certainly an element to it, but for example, there's a character in the book Fulgrim who is basically this artist, and she's trying to create the perfect painting. And she's not managing it. She's close, but she's not quite there. And she starts falling under the influence of Slaanesh, and she starts mixing her own blood into the paints, to make it perfect, to make it better. And eventually she starts, she gets to the point where she can't use any more of her own blood to make this painting perfect. So she starts using other people's. And and Slaanesh is just it's everything you find in Slaanesh is over the top to the point of ridiculousness, which is kind of on purpose, because it's all about chasing the high, chasing the next big thing. Some mindless drug addict who's smacked out on coke, follower of Slaanesh right there, because they're chasing after their passions with little or no regard for their own safety or survival. And that is what Slaanesh is. Well, and that passion could be a passion for killing people. Noise Marines are a classic example of followers of Slaanesh who use these ridiculous, oversized sound generator things to create sounds so beautiful they cause their enemies' heads to explode. Which is kind of ridiculous, but kind of awesome. And so, those are classic examples of followers of Slaanesh. So those are the four Chaos Gods, and they're kind of equal and opposite, and they kind of balance each other in weird ways. The forces of Chaos will either have chosen a particular patron, which has its advantages, but or they will follow Chaos Undivided, which means they nominally follow all 4, give or take equally. Being a true champion of Chaos Undivided is extremely difficult, because keeping all 4 of those guys appeased is extremely hard. Most Chaos champions choose to basically pick one and follow them. So as I say, Khorne tends to be the most prevalent, or at least the loudest and the angriest, but you see a lot of followers of Nurgle, who basically tend to get really fat and bloated and horrible and disease-ridden and pustulely and God knows what else, but they're damn near impossible to kill at the same time. Or you've got followers of Solana, like the Noise Marines I mentioned, and most Chaos Sorcerers are in some way aligned with Tzeentch. So those are basically the 4 Chaos Gods. There's a hierarchy of creatures within the Warp. There are the 4 gods at the top. Then there are the greater demons, each of which... Saying that these things are separate entities is not entirely true. They're basically pieces of the Chaos Gods that have been given a separate mind of their own. But they would never try to overtake their patron god. So then you've got the hierarchy. You've got greater demons, which are bloody terrifying things. Then you've got lesser demons, which are your kind of average, your average Space Marine could probably take one on and have a decent chance of winning. And then you've got minor warp creatures that aren't that dangerous unless there's a bucket load of them, but still potentially dangerous. So all of those things are extremely dangerous. There's also the Demon Princes. Now, I mentioned these briefly when I talked about the Traitor Primarchs, because this is what happened to most of them. A Demon Prince is basically a human being or an alien who has gained so much favour with their patron god, or potentially even with Chaos Undivided, that they are ascended to become a Demon Prince, a creature that's half of the warp and half of reality. And Demon Princes are incredibly powerful. Most of them end up ruling over their own planets. They're functionally immortal. If you kill one, all you can really do is banish it to the warp. It'll come back sooner or later. But it's pretty much the ultimate aim of most followers of Chaos to become a Demon Prince. That's not going to happen to many of them, because most people can't withstand the process of the transformation, because if you get enough gifts from your patron god, one of 2 things will happen. You'll either eventually get enough that you ascend to become a Demon Prince, or the much more likely you'll end up being some kind of warp spawn horror that's barely sentient and is just psychotic to the point of lunacy. That's much more likely to happen. You've got to really knuckle under and be loyal to your patron god if you want a chance of Demon Princehood. But that's pretty much what happened to the Primarchs. As I say, Fulgrim became a Demon Prince of Slanesh. Can't I remember the others? Angeron, I'm pretty sure, is a Demon Prince of Khorne. Can't remember who becomes a... the head of the... what was that? What's the really creepy guy? The one who was... Anyway. But yes. So, the point of Chaos is that they all follow either a patron god or Chaos Undivided. And they, like the Space Marine chapters, there are many, 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 many Chaos warbands. Some follow a specific god. Most tend to follow Chaos Undivided, with individual champions picking a patron god as they ascend through the ranks. Most, or the vast majority of the Chaos Traitor Marines, or the Chaos Space Marines, who are very similar in a lot of ways to the standard Space Marines, except they've fallen to Chaos, and that gives them all sorts of weird quirks. Most of them are remnants left over from the original Horus Heresy. However, there are some who are Space Marines from the current time period who have basically fallen to Chaos in the same way that the originals did. That basically happens when they are corrupted either by the promise of power, or they get tempted over to the side of the Chaos Gods, or hell, there are some cases where you don't even realise it's happening. You're doing something for the greater good of the Imperium, and you end up damning your soul to do it. It's worth noting, incidentally, that when I'm talking about damning souls, I'm being fairly literal here. There's a quibble of whether or not you can describe it as a soul, or if it's just a sort of psychic essence, or whatever you want to call it. But because psychic energy is tied so deeply to the warp, when a human being dies, their energy, their soul, for want of a better word, goes through the warp. Which has gotta suck if you're not aligned with the forces of chaos. there are some interesting theories I've seen banded around 40k lore that imply that there should be other creatures in the warp as well. Psychic emanations based on brighter, happier feelings. There's other people who point out that if there were, the odds are the Chaos Gods have killed them by now. Which is a depressing thought. Chaos Gods are so powerful they've killed happiness. And I'd be curious to see if Games Workshop ever explored that. That could be an interesting idea. But yes. So as I was talking earlier about the Eye of Terror. So the remnants of the Traitor Legions basically fled into the Eye of Terror, which, as I say, is this massive region of space where the laws of physics do not apply properly. Everything is weird in there. Everything is just warped and twisted and wrong. And so they've basically established themselves there, and no Imperial captain with sense goes anywhere near that damn thing. Pretty much one of the only worlds near it is Cadia, and that's used as a massive fortress by the Imperium to just, sit on the edge of it and keep an eye out for invading Chaos forces. Whenever there's a Black Crusade, Cadia is the first planet that gets the hell shot out of it. But yeah, so that's a fun planet. But yeah, so the traitor forces nominally are all split up and broken apart. Every so often, a leader comes along who can unite them to a greater or lesser extent. So the most well-known of those is Abaddon the Despoiler. Abaddon was arguably the second in command of Horus's original legion, which at one point were the Lunar Wolves. They later became the Sons of Horus, and then and after Horus was killed, they became the Black Legion. But Abaddon is one of the few people who can theoretically unite all the forces of chaos under him for one massive assault on the Imperium. And every time he does that, it's referred to as a Black Crusade. And as I say, there have nominally been 13 of them so far. And Black Crusades tend to lead to a couple of billion deaths at least, and just generally not a fun time for the Imperium. Other than that, nobody's really got the clout to unite all the forces of chaos under one banner. So other than that, they tend to stick to smallish raiding forces, a few chapter-sized assaults, and just generally screwing everything up. So the forces of chaos are among the most popular of the Warhammer 40k races, and I do get why. Personally, I find them a little bit dull at times, or a little bit predictable, is what I will say. That's probably because they never really cover the more interesting ones. I'd love to see a game that really focused on some Slaanesh cultists, but normally you get Khorne fanatics because, well, they're easy to demonstrate because they're all just psychopaths who love to kill things with axes. And they love yelling, as I said, they love yelling blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne, which is fun. But no, as I'd really love to see some of the other gods. In particular, I'd love to see a Slaanesh-based force given some real prescience in a game. But we'll see. Incidentally, yesterday, after I recorded that other vlog, they've officially announced Dawn of War 3. Hell yes. I'm looking forward to getting this month's copy of PC Gamer so I can see the 8-page thing about it. Only announced 3 races so far, which is the Space Marines, the Orcs, and the Eldar, but hopefully there'll be a couple more others. And incidentally, if you haven't seen the trailer, go watch it, because Titans! Hell yes. I mean, granted, they're only Imperial Knights, which they're on the small side as Titans go, but still, Titans! Finally. I was actually just saying the other day that I really want a game with modern graphics that's going to include Titans, so hopefully we'll see. They might just limit themselves to the Imperial Knight size ones, but hopefully we'll get some really biggies. Anywho, yeah, I'm off topic again. But yeah, the Forces of Chaos are incredibly popular, and I do get why, because they're kind of Space Marines, but a lot more over the top. They tend to have honking great horns on their helmets and ridiculous things like that. So, yeah. Incidentally, I should talk about demon possession of things. Warp creatures can possess both people and living creatures, and they can possess things. Now, it's worth noting demons do not like possessing things. They tend to get forced into it by somebody higher up the food chain than they are. So, for example, a lot of chaos weaponry includes things like demon-possessed bolters, which basically have a demonic creature crammed inside of them, which significantly improves their accuracy, their effectiveness. It does all sorts of deeply unpleasant things. The demon inside does not like being in there, but it will make the most of it while it's in there to do all the damage it can. So you get all sorts of fun and interesting things like that. But yeah, so that's always a fun thing, including some of the bigger Chaos tanks. For example, Chaos Titans don't have pilots anymore, or the pilots they do have are so fused to their Titan that it's impossible to tell where one ends and the other, where one ends and the other begins. And they're usually loaded down with Christ knows how many demon souls to just keep them running, and it's nasty. It's really horrible, is Chaos. Because Chaos is all about death. It's all about pain. It's all about suffering, because that's what the Chaos Gods were formed from. The deepest, darkest, most unpleasant aspects of human beings and of just every other race in the galaxy. So that's a brief summary of Chaos. Yeah. So I think tomorrow I'll talk about one of the other races. I mentioned the Eldar. So I'll talk about the Eldar tomorrow, and that lets me delve a bit into Slaanesh and things like that. And yeah, if you have any specific questions, do feel free to ask them in the comments section. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I got for this one. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in future videos.